Welcome back, everyone. We have seen some unusual weather this year in Michigan and across the globe. 6 News meteorologist Kendall Wilson is back to tell us why the weather in 2023 deserves some special attention in this week's Weather Wednesday.
We asked people on social media to describe the weather that we have seen in 2023. Some of the most common responses were different, unpredictable, lovely, and warm. And scientists would agree with that last one. Scientists have now confirmed that 2023 is the hottest year on record for the entire globe. Now, these records do go back to the 1850s, but scientists have also used data from ice cores and tree rings to determine that this is also the warmest decade the Earth has seen in over 125,000 years. And the climate disasters that occurred across the globe this year were fueled and in some cases enhanced by this intense heat. This year alone, we had historic wildfires in Canada, Hawaii, and Greece, a global marine heat wave where the average global sea surface temperature reached an all-time high, damaging crucial ecosystems. We saw major and deadly floods, droughts, hurricanes, and life-threatening heat waves, giving 2023 a record-breaking number of billion-dollar weather disasters. The World Weather Attribution studies how climate change influences extreme weather, and they found that this kind of heat would have been, quote, virtually impossible without human-induced climate change. Analysts from Climate Central found that unless drastic cuts to carbon pollution are made, younger generations, like millennials and Gen Z, could see temperatures warm by 7 or 8 degrees in their lifetime. While that might not seem like much, it would mean that those generations would experience 2 to 7 times more extreme weather events over their lifetime compared to previous generations. However, if drastic cuts were made, we could keep that number between 2.7 and 4 degrees over the same period. Reports like these have put pressure on global leaders who just wrapped up a climate summit in Dubai a few weeks ago. At this conference, world leaders agreed to combat climate change by establishing a global goal to triple renewable energy and double the rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. In addition, nearly 200 countries have agreed to transition away from the use of fossil fuels, which is the largest contributor to climate change, accounting for nearly 75% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, which help to trap the heat emitted from the sun. Even though a climate like the one we have today would be nearly impossible without human-induced climate change, there is a natural factor in play. We are currently in an El Niño pattern, which means that we have warmer water in the equatorial Pacific. This does help to slightly increase global temperatures, but this pattern is expected to last until at least April of next year and could cause global temperatures to continue to rise for 2024. Last week, we saw some really cool pictures and videos coming out of the Straits of Mackinac. Take a look at this. A water spout formed over the area just before lunchtime last Tuesday. The National Weather Service says it only lasted for a few minutes, and thankfully there was no damage reported, but nonetheless, I'm sure it was a really cool sight to see. You know, water spouts in the Great Lakes actually aren't uncommon, but normally we see these forming in the months of August, September, and October. We can think about water spouts in two different ways. There are tornadic water spouts and fair weather water spouts. Tornadic water spouts will form in a very similar way to regular tornadoes. We have the rotating thunderstorm in a vortex that extends down to the surface. In this case, over water, creating our water spout. These are the most destructive of the two, but thankfully they aren't the most common. Most water spouts will actually develop from non-thunderstorm clouds. These fair weather water spouts like their water to reach into the mid to upper 80s, which is why when they occur in the Great Lakes, they are in shallow water where the temperature is warmer. But more often, we will see these in the tropical climates like the Florida Keys, which is the water spout capital of the world with over 400 of these occurring a year. Now, fair weather water spouts will start off at the surface. We have that warm air evaporating and rising throughout the atmosphere. That warm air will then come in contact with stronger winds and it will begin to rotate. Now, as we continue to stretch that column of air out, it will rotate even faster, creating our vortex. Almost like when an ice skater pulls their arms in so they can rotate faster. The same concept applies here. On average, water spouts will last anywhere between 2 to 20 minutes. Either way, you're not going to want to underestimate them, as they can still be just as destructive as a regular tornado on land. So while they can be cool to look at from afar, they still should be taken very seriously. On Sunday, Tropical Storm Hillary arrived in the state of California, prompting the first ever tropical storm warnings in the state's history. In fact, Hillary was only one of 3 confirmed tropical systems that have made landfall in the history of the Golden State. So it's almost needless to say that tropical cyclones are extremely rare for this area. But why? How exactly has California been able to avoid these systems for so long? Well, it all follows the old basic sports analogy of 3 strikes and you're out. The first strike comes when we talk about some of the cold ocean currents in the area. The California water currents kind of act like a shield to help weaken or deter any approaching storm because they are bringing some really cold water from the Gulf of Alaska down the coastline. Now, this is going to lead directly into strike number 2, which is the cold sea surface temperatures. Now, this water off of the west coast is extremely cold. Sea surface temperatures near the Pacific Northwest coast are normally in the 50s. Now, these temperatures do slightly warm as we move a little bit south towards California, but at that point, they're only in the mid to upper 60s, which is still way too cool to support any sort of tropical development. Tropical systems, for reference, normally like their water temperatures to be at least 80 degrees to power any significant storms. And as you can see, we definitely don't have that here. Now, the final strike has to do with something called the trade winds. These are the dominant or prevailing winds that exist in the upper portions of the atmosphere. Now, since most of the tropical systems in the Central Pacific will develop off of the coast of Mexico, these trade winds will actually help to push or steer any sort of developing storms from this coastline out into the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So there you go. With the combination of cold sea surface temperatures, the cold ocean currents in the area, and unfavorable wind speeds, hurricanes in California have 3 strikes against them, therefore making it extremely hard, but as we just saw on Sunday, not necessarily impossible for the area to come by. We saw our first snowflakes of the 2023 season this week on October 30th. Despite the early flurries, thankfully our ground temperatures are still way too warm to allow for any accumulations or impacts. But as we head into the month of November and deeper into the winter season, that snow will not only become more common, but more of a hazard as well. If we go based on climate data for the Lansing area, we don't have to pull out those snow shovels just quite yet. The average first accumulating snow, which is defined as snow totaling 1/10 of an inch or more, is around November 11th. Nearly a month after that, we start to see the National Weather Service issue various winter weather statements for our area. Based on data collected from the past 18 years, we see around 20 winter weather advisories a year in mid-Michigan, with an average start date of December 13th. These types of advisories are issued by the National Weather Service whenever we have forecasted snowfall totals above 3 inches. Winter storm warnings, however, are issued when snowfall totals are expected to exceed 6 inches in the area. Thankfully, based on past data, we don't usually start to see these types of statements from the National Weather Service until January 9th. And as you might have guessed, these are way less frequent, with an average of only 5 to 6 seen per year. But like all good things, the snow can come with both some good and bad. While it may be highly unpleasant to drive in and just deal with in general, the snow can sometimes bring some beautiful scenes across mid-Michigan, as well as bringing several activities for the kids to enjoy while off of school, like snowball fights and the fan favorite, building a snowman. In fact, the first official snowman of the year was built by the National Weather Service office in Gaylord, Michigan on Sunday night. Even though he is a bit small, he's a perfect reminder that sometimes the snow can put a little smile on all of our faces.